Okay, well, the next thing we're going to do is we need to remove the right front wheel and get the car up off the ground with the wheel off so we can get to some things that are on the end of the engine at the bottom. You'll understand when you see it. So first thing you need to do is you need to be sure that you have the car something under the back wheel like I do to keep it from rolling backwards or forwards, whichever the case may be. And you'll need to go ahead and loosen your lug nuts before you take it off the ground and get them loosened up, broken loose. And then what I'll do is I will take a jack and jack the car up, and I'm going to put a jack stand under the car because we'll need this jack for another reason here in a minute. So be sure you have a good jack stand and don't get under the car if you don't have to at all, and just be safe about this. But that's our next step, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, wheel is off. I have my assistant with me here. Helps me out. Say hello. Oh goodness, we're gonna rip my pants, aren't you? And show you here. Whoops. I'm gonna step on my assistant's toes there. You can see I've got a jack stand under the suspension member there, the mounting point, good solid location. And also, when you jack a car like this up, a unibody car, be sure that you jack it under someplace like back here where the subframe mounts on, or someplace. Don't do it like halfway down the car or something, because you'll bend the floor pan easily. One good thing to do here when you get your wheel off, especially if you're working on a car you're not familiar with, is just kind of check over things, especially if it's higher mileage like this one is, and just see if everything's in decent shape under here, any kind of safety issues. This one looks good for the most part, except that I see that it has a broken dust boot on the strut up here. That's supposed to be one piece. And a little bit more serious, I noticed that, look back here, there's grease on the axle boot, and that means it's probably split somewhere along there, and that will mean it'll probably need an axle replaced at some point if it doesn't already. I've not heard this car run or drove it. So the next step, we're going to come back up and we need to remove this engine mount here on the end of the engine. You can see there's several fasteners. There's two actually at the end here. There's a wire connector you need to be sure you remember to put back. That's a ground. There's a bolt there, and you got a little brace over here. It's got two bolts on it, one here and one there. Now, I've never worked on one of these cars before, so we'll be kind of learning together, but I believe that's all that's going to be involved in taking this loose. Now then, that said, before we can take the mount off, we have to get the jack under the engine oil pan and jack up on the jack till we get just contacted, just enough to take the load off that engine mount, because of course you can't take an engine mount out if you don't have the engine supported, and that's the only mount you have to take off. You don't have to take any other mounts off anywhere else, just that one, because that's it's in the way of your belts and everything. So let's get started on that. Now, one thing to remember when you're using this, I'll show you doing this kind of operation with a jack. Don't jack directly between the jack and the oil pan, because you see how small this pad is on there. It kind of concentrates the pressure, the load, and it can crack or dent your oil pan. So you'll see, I'll show you, we're going to use a block of wood between the two of them. Okay, this is the setup you should be looking at. Of course, got a little bit of a shield here in the way, but you can look. The engine oil pan is right here. Now, I've got my block of wood between the two, and I've just jacked the jack up just enough to contact it. I'm not trying to go any higher at this point. There's no need to, because what we're really doing here, this is more of a support type of a thing here, instead of trying to raise the engine. There's no need to really raise the engine at all, so don't go wailing on this jack, because on this car, this oil pan is metal, sheet metal, and the drain plug is right kind of facing back here. So you need to be on your P's and Q's dealing with this, and understand this step clearly before you do it. Don't go jacking up right here on this. You'll bend the heck out of that oil pan. And also, this shield will come off. We're gonna remove this. It may just, we may not take it all the way off. It looks like it goes, yeah, this one goes at least halfway across. We'll probably go ahead and remove it because we got to get to the pulleys and everything under here. We got a few little steps to deal with. All right, let's get this mount removed. Oh, and by the way, guys, good idea to do here is do what I did and remove this jack handle, especially if you have a jack that the handles, you got it positioned so it's coming out of the front of the car, because 9 times out of 10 you'll do what I almost just did and trip over the jack, and that could cause you some serious problems if you knock that jack out from under there. So just get it where there's nothing projecting out here. This is more of a safety issue for sure. Okie dokie, here's this mount out, but unfortunately when I got it out, as you can see, it's broken. The rubber's broken apart in it, so gonna have to put a motor mount on the parts list. But anyway, that's what it looks like, and now you see why it's gotta come out of there. The next thing we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to get these belts off. You've got, looks like just 2 belts. You can see down there, that's air conditioner down on the bottom, right down there to the straight to the bottom there. This is power steering, and that's alternator back there. I'm gonna go, since we're gonna do that, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna disconnect the battery over there just to be safe, because I'd hate to ruin an alternator or something else, shorten it out, because we'll be kind of wrestling around in there. These cars like this, they usually all use the same kind of adjustment system, and it's not terribly hard to deal with, but it's kind of inconvenient to get to it. I can see, I'm looking down in there, you see the end of this bolt right there that's pointing kind of straight out right there in the center. That's they call that a jack screw. That's what you screw left or right to adjust the tension on the belt. I don't know why this car, as new as it is, doesn't have a serpentine belt. It doesn't. Hyundai didn't either. So what you got to do, you can't really see it here because of the light, but kind of down along, right down in that area there. Let me see if I can get some more light on it. You can just barely see the head of a bolt right there, right there, kind of. That's the lock bolt. You have to loosen that because you can't, it won't slide, and you got to loosen that up, and then you come up and you loosen your pivot, which is going to be right here. Looks like, wait a minute, right here. That's your pivot bolt. It's got a weld nut over here. You don't have to worry about that. So you just loosen this. You don't need to take the power steering off. You just loosen it up, because what you want to do is get the belt off. And that's the outside belt. And these belts look like they're almost new. I hope they are. If they're getting in good shape, I'll reuse them. And the alternator is going to also have the same kind of adjustment back there. And I think one of those has to be gotten to from under the car. So I'll wrestle with this and get the belts off of it and go from there. Something to keep in mind, you may need to get some tape or something, and when you take these belts off, you need to like put a little label on them, what they are, and the direction of travel. Just remember that when you look at the end of an engine, the belt end of it, excuse me, where the belts are, the engines always run clockwise. They run this way. Everything rotates around like a clock. So you always know how to mark the direction of travel, because you really kind of need to put, it's not going to kill them or anything, but if you're going to reinstall the belts, it's just a good idea to put them kind of back the way they've been running. And also, you don't want to get them mixed up, because then they won't fit. Alright, well, this is going to be a fun part of this, so I need to launch into this, and I'll get back with you whenever I get this stuff loosened up and all that. Okie doke, you got the power steering and air conditioning belt off. I have it over there hung up, and a piece of tape on it with the label. Next thing we need to do is we need to get this alternator belt removed. Now I can see that the pivot, if you look down in here, there's the same kind of deal. It's got the little 14mm bolt pointing out. I'll try to point to it with my finger. Put my finger on it right. Find my finger. Where'd my finger go? Okay, there we are. Right there. That's a 14mm. You loosen this. You loosen the pivot, which is on the other side of the alternator, and we'll have to get to that from under the car, so I'll show you that. And then once you got both of them loosened, you just back this thing out counterclockwise, and that kind of pushes the alternator in towards the center line of the engine. So that's how this one worked also. I'll give you a tip though. This water pump pulley down there has to come off, and that's 4 bolts you see that hold that on. And don't mess with that thing in the center. That's not it. Just take the rest of it loose there and get it off the water pump. And do that before you take the alternator belt off, because the engine will give it some resistance from turning. Because you try to do it afterwards, you'll have to hold it with vice grips or something like that. It's just kind of a pain. So just go ahead and take your tools as appropriate and loosen those bolts. You probably could, I don't know, you might, we'll see, maybe if that thing comes off, you just go ahead and take the belt off that way. There's no harm in that. It's just that when you go to put everything back together, you'll have to loosen the alternator up to get the belt back on it and get this put back together, because it's just too hard to do to try to do that in reverse, you know what I mean? So let me do that, and we'll get that loosened, and we'll get this splash shield off the bottom. Okay folks, let me show you what I'm doing to get this water pump pulley loose. The bolts on it, I noticed when I was trying to turn it, I have a 10mm wrench here. That's what the bolts are, is 10. And when I was trying to turn it, the whole engine's trying to turn, which I was kind of afraid it would. And so what I ended up doing is I went ahead and removed this splash shield from under the front. There's just, how many bolts are there? Looks like 5 bolts. And it just comes right out from under here. And I went ahead and got the right size heavy duty socket and my heavy duty ratchet, and went ahead and put on the crank bolt down here. Just see it in there. Well, you'll have to believe me because the socket's on it. But and then it kind of just braces up against this axle over here, as you see. Get my light on it. Just turn the socket the right way so it locks when you do that. So now when I turn these bolts to loosen them, it won't turn the whole entire engine. And I did notice that when I was turning the engine a little bit, the timing belts, all that's not moving. So I know what I'm going to find under there. And also this thing here, the spring I showed you, that is indeed the tensioner spring. And presumably this car's been running for at least a couple thousand miles with no tensioner spring on it, so that wasn't good for it. And that combined with this old dried up timing belt was the end of it for it. That's probably what was making the noise. They said I heard a noise, and that was probably the timing tensioner flopping around in there. So just use your head when you buy something like this. Make sure it's not an interference engine. Don't even try this. If it's an interference engine and it's got timing belt problems, don't even try it. Just don't even try it. So, okay, back to that. Okay, alternator belt is off. Stand corrected. This bolt I told you about that's facing out on that alternator bracket right there, that's actually a 12, and the jack screw back there, that's also a 12, but the bolt that's down on the bottom of the alternator, which you access from the bottom of the car, is a 14. So now, last thing I'm going to do for tonight is I'm going to go ahead and just take this upper cover off here. It's just got a series of probably 10mm bolts on it. There's one there, probably one back here at the back adjacent in the same opposite area. There's one there, and probably one back behind over here too. You just have to feel around for them, just find them and just remove those. Go from there.